So today we're talking about the NAIC proceedings. And so some of you may have a lot of experience with these. Some of you write the minutes that go into these. And some of you may have no experience with them at all. So I'm just going to go through what they are, what's in them, what kinds of questions you can answer with the proceedings, and how to use our library tool to access them and search them. So let's start off with the basics. What are the proceedings? They are the official record of the NAIC going back to 1871. They contain meeting minutes from every national meeting that's ever happened. And so this would include all kinds of things. So legislative history of model laws, how they were developed, how the language was developed, development of almost every kind of regulatory guidance we put out. So that's actuarial guidelines, accounting rules, white papers, all of our handbooks and manuals, all of that stuff gets documented in the proceedings. Comment letters and any presentations that are made to any of our groups, those get included as well. And then lots of kind of historical pieces of information, meeting history, history of commissioners and the officers, committee lists, how the committees have changed over time. All of that stuff is included. So you can use the proceedings to find out all kinds of information, but here are a couple examples. So what year was a particular model law initially adopted or amended or changed? What groups submitted comment letters during the development of the Travel Insurance Model Act or any other model law? Questions about NAIC products and services. So when was SURF founded and why? When and why was the Education and Training Department founded? The library, we can trace the library's history going back to the early 70s, late 60s. When was auto insurance first added to annual statement reporting? What kinds of concerns were being discussed when long-term care insurance was first developed or any other kind of new product? How did the NAIC start computer processing of financial statements versus the handwritten paper kind that started out with at the beginning of the NAIC? So these are all questions that you can answer with the proceedings. Any product or service that the NAIC offers, just about you can find out the history of with the proceedings. So they are a little bit quirky, just like any kind of historical document. If it doesn't make it into the meeting minutes, we may not have any record of it. So sometimes we'll come across this, especially looking at like model law language. Sometimes people will want to know why a particular word or phrase was included. And if if that didn't make it into the meeting minutes, we may just not be able to find out that information. The earlier years of the proceedings are fairly small. And as we get further on in history, they get larger and larger. If you come into the library in the Kansas City office on the 15th floor, you can look at the physical copies that are on the shelf, and you can see over time the books themselves get bigger and bigger, for better or for worse. But we have lots more information now in the proceedings than we did in previous years. And the table of contents is really your best navigation tool, especially with the later years that are so huge. That's really the best way to kind of find your way through these huge documents. So let's take a look at what the table of contents looks like. This is just a screenshot. So you can see there are all of these things that have Roman numerals. The meeting minutes themselves don't actually start until way down here where it says opening session. So that first section of the proceedings contains a ton of information. So you can see what is the committee structure for a given year, and that changes a lot over time. You can see for this national meeting which groups are new, which groups have been disbanded, which groups have changed names, which can be really helpful if you're tracking things over time and you're searching for a particular group and the names change. That's where you can look up and see. You can see who zone membership. You can see just all of the full listing of committee membership and task force membership, and you can see a list of what groups were active at this particular meeting. List of members by state. So if you want to look up, who was the insurance commissioner from the state of New Mexico in 1945, you can do that by going to the 1945 proceedings and looking at the membership list. The member tenure list is really interesting. It has a list of, for every single state, every single insurance commissioner, and how long they were in office. And so you can track the history of a particular state over time. The meeting record, again, is some historical information. So that shows a list of every national meeting that's been held, the location of the meeting, and who the officers were at the time. And then the model law listing can be really useful if you're interested in model law history. That shows every place in the proceedings text where a particular model law was mentioned. So that can be really useful as well. So how do you access the proceedings? This is a screenshot from our library website. If you don't know, it's library.naic.org. There's a button right on the homepage that says search NAIC proceedings. So if you click that button, it's just going to bring up a chronological list of the proceedings, starting with 1871. And so, pretty straightforward on how to access that. So once you click into a particular proceeding, this is kind of what it looks like. So it shows the year. Every year, no matter how many meetings happened in that year, all of the proceedings for that year are located in that one record. So you can see here, the by file name, what you're opening, and then in the notes section, it will kind of give you some more information about what meeting this is from, where it was held, all that kind of thing. And then there's also a PDF viewer that's built into that same screen. So you can kind of scroll through, quickly visually to see what that looks like. So depending on how many meetings happened in a particular year and how large those files are, there might be more than one file per meeting. So you can see here, for 2006, looks like the first two meetings only had 2 files. The third meeting has 3, and the fourth meeting has 2 again. So, if you're looking for a particular group, you can look at the notes section, and that will kind of help you know which file you need to open. So if I'm looking for something from E-Committee, you can see E-Committee almost always ends up in the last file because it's toward the end of the alphabet. So that notes section can be a helpful navigation tool as well. So let's take a look at a couple of these things kind of in that beginning section that I mentioned. So here's the member tenure list, and if you go scroll to that page in any given proceedings, here's what it looks like. So I just took a couple of screenshots from Missouri, and I cut out a bunch of stuff in the middle. But so here's a list of every Missouri insurance commissioner going back to 1871. You can also see from this list that Missouri's insurance commissioner is appointed by the governor, but it will also note, if it's a state that elects their commissioner. You can see the name of the position has changed. So originally it was superintendent of insurance, and now it's director. And you can also see here, you see a couple of places where we have an acting director, and that means they had been appointed by the governor, but hadn't been officially confirmed by the state legislature yet. And then you can see how long, what the tenure of each commissioner was. So this isn't all of the years of Missouri, but you can see in this particular screenshot, the longest serving one has been John Huff so far. So lots of interesting kind of information there, kind of state by state. So let's say you want to find a specific group's minutes. How would you do that? So, I mentioned the table of contents is kind of your best navigation tool. So let's say I'm looking for the asset and liability valuation working group's minutes from 1985. So I click into the 1985 proceedings, and this is what shows up in the table of contents. And I don't see the working group listed here. And that's because in the table of contents, it just shows the main committee and then the task forces that report up to that committee. Any working groups, subgroups don't show up in that table of contents. But don't worry, because I'll show you kind of what that looks like. But just a couple of things to note. Sometimes committee names change, and so that can be a little bit tricky. If you search now, it's the Financial Condition E committee instead of the EX4 subcommittee. So that can be a little bit tricky if you're tracking a group over time. Just kind of something to be aware of. And then again, in the table of contents at the very beginning, only the main committee and the task forces are listed. So if I'm looking for this working group, I'm going to go to the first page of the financial condition subcommittee. So I'm going to go to page 241. And here's what that looks like. So this has, again, a table of contents for that committee's group. And you can see this very first thing here, asset and liability valuation working group report. So that's how I would, that's going to be the minutes for this particular group for this particular national meeting. And then you can go to page 244 and read, about what that working group was up to at this time. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you kind of figure out how these documents are laid out, it's fairly straightforward. It doesn't change over time. Names change and stuff, but the actual structure of the documents does not. So that's helpful. So what if you don't know which main committee a subgroup or a working group belongs to? How would you do that? So again, if you go back to the main table of contents, there's a place where it says committee structure or committee membership. And if you go to that section, it will list every single group that was working at that, during that national meeting, list the name, their members, and which main committee they report to. So you can see here's a screenshot from 1985's committee membership list. And all of the kind of subcommittees that reported up. This is obviously just one page of it, but you can scroll through. So that way, if you don't know which main committee you need to look at, this is where you would go to kind of figure out which groups reported up to which main committee. So how would we answer a question like, who was the NAIC president in a given year? So I'm going to go with 1945. How would you find that information? This is a question we get asked a lot, and so I'll just kind of take you through how you would answer this. So you'd go to the NAIC meeting record, and here's a little screenshot of what that looks like. Again, I just took out a little segment of a year because this list is really long, but you can see in 1945, the national meeting happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the president was the commissioner from Minnesota, Newell Johnson, but you can also see the names of other officers. So, you could use this meeting record to answer questions like, has there ever been an NAIC president or officer from the state of Rhode Island? Has there ever been a national meeting held in Hawaii or Alaska? When did the NAIC switch from having one national meeting a year to having 2 or 3 or 4? Because we've had all, various numbers of national meetings throughout the years. So this is a really useful tool. It contains lots of good information about, the association and where we've been over the 152 years. So what if you're not looking for a specific group, but you're wanting to find a specific term or name? So to do that, you're going to go back to our library homepage, library.naic.org. Click this gray button that says Advanced Search. And then you want to use this filter by content section on the right-hand side and make sure only the NAIC proceedings box is checked. So what that means is anything that you search, it's only going to search the text of the proceedings and not everything else that we have in our catalog. And then you'll want to use quotation marks too, if you're the search term you're looking for is more than one word, and I'll show you why in just a second. But here, let's do a quick search for Franklin D. Roosevelt, and here's what comes up. So it looks like we had 5 hits for the name Franklin D. Roosevelt. So you open up, whichever year you want to look at, open up the PDF, and then you do a Control F to find the term. Now, here's where I like to tell people that we don't have the same budget as Google, and so unfortunately, our search is not quite as sophisticated as Google. If you do a Google search, it will kind of pull out a highlight for the top hits, so you can kind of see the context of where your search term shows up. So do I want to click into this or not? We don't have that capability here, and so you do have to use the Control F feature. But that's kind of what we're working with. It works though. So, if you're looking for a term, that's kind of how you would do that. So let's look at another example. Here I have searched for the term credit default swaps. That was a big topic in the financial crisis of 2008. So I had only the proceedings checked on the right-hand side, and I used quotation marks and searched for credit default swaps. And I get 19 hits. And so I would, depending on what I'm looking for, open up the document, do a Control F, and here we see this is the first mention of credit default swaps in the NAIC proceedings from the year 2000. And so just want to illustrate sort of why the quotation marks are important. So here I did a search at the top for reinsurance task force, and I did not use quote marks. And I get 123 hits. So 123 out of 152, that is a lot. That's impossible for one person to be able to sort through. And you can kind of see why. You can see in this box over here, it's searching for the words independently of each other. So anytime the word reinsurance shows up and task and force separately. But if you're actually wanting to find the minutes of the reinsurance task force, you use quotation marks and it searches for the whole phrase all together. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see my search is for the phrase reinsurance task force, and I only get 41 hits. That's much more manageable, especially if you kind of know the era that you're looking for. Big difference. So make sure those quote marks are really important. So here's just one more example of that. I searched for International Association of Insurance Supervisors. Without the quotation marks, there's 109 hits, yikes. And with the quotation marks, I'm only getting 31. So that you can see just at a glance, the first time the IAIS was mentioned was 1992. So those quote marks are a good tool to help you find what you're looking for. So let's talk about model laws really quick. NAIC model laws, kind of a big deal. There's like 190 some of them. And the development of all of these is sort of traced throughout the proceeding. So how would you find, the minutes for sort of the development? And you might answer questions like, when was this section added? Why did they use this word instead of this word? What is the intent behind this section? So every single NAIC model law has at the very end, if you scroll all the way to the end of the document, it has this, which is called the chronological summary of actions. And it just basically shows you where every amendment to this model was officially adopted. So you can see the first time the Unfair Trade Practices Act was adopted by the NAIC was in 1947. So if I go to the 1947 proceedings and pull up these are page numbers. So if I pull these up, what it's going to show me is the text of the model, and it's going to show me the vote and how the membership voted, kind of state by state. So that just tells me sort of when. But if I want to see sort of more in depth about the development process, then that's where you need to kind of start working backwards. So I'd start with the 1947 and look at these pages, and then I'd probably go back one meeting to the 1946 and look at that working group's minutes and kind of work backwards. Usually it takes, a year or so to get these models developed, kind of depending on what's happening, what the subject is, what the extent of the amendments. But if you start with this here and work backwards, you can get a pretty good picture of what was going on with that model, what was changed and why. If any industry groups or interested parties submitted comment letters or suggestions, all that stuff would be tracked. And this is kind of the same principle you would do if you were looking for the history of maybe not a model law, but maybe another handbook or an actuarial guideline or anything along those lines. Kind of the same idea. You'd start sort of where, at the point in time where the whatever work product was adopted, and then kind of work backwards. The other thing, if you're kind of looking for model laws in a particular year, I'd point you to this model law listing. So again, if you go here, it's going to show you every single NAIC model law that was mentioned in this particular proceedings, in this particular national meeting, and the page numbers. So you can go to, it might not be a group that's working on changing or amending a model or developing a new model, but it might be, another group that's mentioning it in some other, the course of something else. So you see this a lot with, say, the accreditation committee. They mention a lot of model laws, whether or not it's going to be an accreditation standard, for example. That's another really great tool kind of at your disposal. So I know it's a lot. These are complicated documents. They're complex, they're huge. There's 152 years worth of content. So we don't want you to be overwhelmed when you're looking at these documents. They are publicly available for you to kind of self-service if you'd like, but if you're spending more than, say, 15 or 20 minutes looking and you're not finding what you're looking for, that's really when you should contact the library team. We spend a lot of time in these documents. We've, between the team, we've got a couple decades worth of experience working with these. And so, we don't want you to struggle. And if you are having a hard time finding what you're looking for, just reach out to us. We're happy to help you find what you need. That's what we're here for. So probably the best way is to just send us an email at our team email inbox. So that's all I have for now. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions. Let me look at the chat. Oh, Christy says she just used the proceedings on Tuesday. I'm really happy to hear that, Christy. Any other questions? You can unmute or use the chat, whatever you prefer. I'll just mention the library team gets lots of questions that we use the proceedings to get answers to. All kinds of different questions from internal folks, from external folks, from regulators. So this is, one of those resources we end up using on a weekly basis. They used to be just in print, obviously, and we made them we digitized the full collection and made them publicly available about 5-ish years ago. And so, this is not a resource that's just available to staff and regulators, but it is available to the public as well. So if you get interested parties who are looking for, minutes or old versions of models or anything along those lines, you can always point them here as well, and they can sort of find their own resources. All right, any other questions? Oh, charges. So someone's asking, where can I see if and how the charges have changed from year to year? And are the charges listed by year? So I think what you'd have to do to find this would be to go at the fall national meeting where the charges for the next year are adopted. I don't think there's a place where they're all compiled sort of in one place together. But so yeah, I would go to that group's like December or fall meeting whenever they met, and see sort of where the charges were adopted. And you could find them that way. Boolean search. Someone asked about Boolean search. Yes. So in our tool, Boolean search is supported. And I always suggest though, if you click that advanced search button, that's probably the best tool to navigate our website more generally, not just the proceedings, because it has a whole bunch of fields. You can search by author name, date, publisher, subject. So I always suggest, if you're looking for something in particular, instead of just browsing, I recommend starting with that advanced search button, and then that'll help you. But yes, you can do Boolean searching. Oh, someone's asking what charges are. Good question. So charges are, every committee, working group, subgroup has charges, which are basically what they're supposed to be working on throughout the year. So it could be, developing a model law, could be monitoring developments in a particular market, could be really anything, but it just sort of says like, this is what this group does. And those are the current versions. If you go out to the NAIC website and go to that committee's page, it's right there on the committee's page. But they change. Sometimes they change year to year. Sometimes they don't change a whole lot. But that's sort of what charges are and what they mean. Good question. Yeah. I guess the last thing I would say is, I know I see names here who write minutes that end up in the proceedings. I know that can be kind of a chore sometimes, but do know that people absolutely use and see the minutes that you write. And so it's really it's not a waste of time. It's a great resource that people use. I mean, clearly we're still reading minutes from decades and decades ago, so that's really important work, even though it can be kind of a slog sometimes. So shout out to those folks who write minutes. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, like I said, this has been recorded. We'll get the recording posted along with the slides to our SharePoint site soon. But really appreciate you joining us. And if you have any other questions about proceedings along the way or anything else, any other library related things, feel free to reach out anytime. Have a good afternoon.